May 1945. The war in Europe is gasping its final breaths. The sky above northern Germany is pale and windless, a thin mist hanging over ruined villages and open fields. Along one dirt road near Salzwedel, a column of women moves slowly west. Their steps are uneven, their faces hollow. Strips of cloth bind their feet where shoes have long since disintegrated. They have marched for days, driven on by guards who no longer believe in orders but still carry rifles. The rumble of distant artillery drifts like thunder. Each echo fades farther away. For these women, that sound is not fear anymore. It is the sound of something ending. They come from many places: Poland, France, the Soviet Union, Holland, Norway. Some were resistance couriers, some students, some simply Jews caught in the machinery of a collapsing empire. All were prisoners of Ravensbrück or its satellites. Hunger and typhus travel with them like shadows. Every few hundred meters another body falls. The guards shout half-heartedly, then move on. The women have learned not to look back. At dawn, the road bends toward open farmland. A low hum grows in the distance. Engines, unfamiliar. The women freeze. Out of the mist, olive-drab trucks appear, marked with white stars. American reconnaissance jeeps, followed by armored half-tracks of the 84th Infantry Division. The soldiers slow, rifles raised but not firing. What they see ahead does not look like an army, nor like civilians. It looks like ghosts. The guards hesitate, then drop their weapons and scatter into the woods. The column of women stops moving. Silence fills the space between the two groups. Then one soldier steps forward, hands open, speaking softly in English none of the prisoners understand. "It's over," he says again and again, lowering his weapon. The words mean nothing, but the tone is unmistakable. The women do not cheer. They simply stand, trembling, until one of them begins to cry. The Americans move among them cautiously. They have seen battle from Normandy to the Rhine, but nothing like this. The smell of sickness and unwashed bodies hits them first. Their medics rush to fetch water, canteens, rations. The first gesture is simple: a metal cup offered to a stranger. The second is stranger still: bars of soap and folded towels from field supply crates. Routine hygiene protocol for contagious prisoners, but to the women it feels like a miracle. Some hold the soap as if it were treasure. Others press it to their faces, smelling it through tears. Army reports written that afternoon will describe approximately 600 female prisoners in extreme condition, liberated near Salzwedel. The words are flat, bureaucratic. The scene is not. Medics set up buckets by a barn, stretch canvas sheets for privacy, fill pails from a nearby stream. The women stare, hesitant. In the camps, undressing meant humiliation or death. The Americans wait in silence until one woman steps forward, thin, unsteady, determined. She wets the soap, rubs her arms, watches the gray water run down and vanish into the soil. Slowly the others follow. The air fills with the sound of washing, soft splashes that sound almost like rain. For the soldiers, it is unbearable and holy all at once. They pass out more soap, more towels, combs, and medical disinfectant. One medic writes in his notebook, "They flinched when we offered towels." Another notes how a woman too weak to stand insisted on washing her hands lying on the ground. She whispered, "I want to be clean before I die." She lived. She lived to tell her story 40 years later. The Americans improvise a field hospital. Cots from supply trucks line the barn interior. Blankets are laid across straw. The women weigh scarcely 90 pounds. Lice crawl in their hair, but their eyes are bright with disbelief. Army photographers arrive, orderly men with bulky cameras, recording everything for headquarters. Their black and white images will become evidence, not art. Sunken faces, open hands, soap bubbles clinging to wrists. In the surrounding villages, German civilians watch the convoys with silent faces. For them, the war is finished, the Reich a ruin. The sound of Allied engines replaces the propaganda loudspeakers that once promised victory. In this shifting landscape, the Salzwedel camp becomes a microcosm of liberation. Water, soap, and kindness do what bombs and treaties cannot. They restore the idea of being human. Over the next days, The field fills with movement. Red Cross trucks arrive with biscuits and condensed milk. Translators from nearby units, Polish Americans, French Canadians, try to make sense of the flood of names and languages. Many of the women cannot remember their own birthdays. Some cannot speak at all. One nurse from the 16th Field Hospital later recalls, "They didn't ask for food first. They asked for a place to wash." Medical notes document the statistics: temperature, pulse, weight, presence of lice, condition, critical. But the real transformation happens beyond measurement. A woman runs her fingers through wet hair and smiles for the first time in years. Another hums a lullaby while cleaning her friend's wounds. The soldiers bring mirrors. The women stare at their reflections as if meeting strangers. Tears fall without sound. The army follows procedure. After initial care, the survivors are registered as displaced persons. Trucks begin transferring them to larger facilities near Hanover. Each vehicle carries dozens wrapped in army blankets. The road winds past burned villages and blooming orchards. A nurse writes in her diary, "They looked at the fields as if they had never seen green before." Along the way, the soldiers share rations: crackers, chocolate, cigarettes. One woman accepts a chocolate bar but doesn't eat it. She holds it to her cheek, weeping. The sweetness of smell alone is enough. In the evenings, the soldiers sit around small fires, too stunned to speak of battle. They had imagined war ending with flags and victory parades. Instead, it ends with emaciated women scrubbing their skin under starlight. One private writes home, "We thought we were fighting for land. Now I know we were fighting for these people." Elsewhere across Germany, similar scenes unfold: Dachau, Bergen-Belsen, Mauthausen. The liberation follows the same ritual: water first, then food, then silence. At Bergen-Belsen, British troops burn barracks to halt typhus, then hand survivors soap, as if to replace the stench with a promise. At Dachau, American medics shave heads and wash wounds before feeding anyone, afraid food alone might kill them. Hygiene becomes the language of mercy. Cleanliness becomes the first act of peace. Back at Salzwedel, new routines form. The women rise at dawn, wash again, line up for checkups. The soldiers have grown protective, calling them the girls regardless of age. They scavenge extra towels, perfume, anything to restore comfort. One mechanic rigs a shower from a fuel drum and tin pipes. Laughter echoes across the yard when warm water finally flows. For a moment it feels like life before the war, or perhaps after it. When rain falls, the smell of soap mingles with earth and diesel. The women wrap themselves in towels, standing under the drizzle. One jokes that even heaven is helping them wash. A medic snaps a photograph. Faces lifted, eyes closed, rain streaking over smiles. It will appear months later in an army publication captioned simply, "Liberated women cleanse themselves." The understatement hides the miracle. Every day brings new arrivals. Other convoys of prisoners freed from smaller camps. Some recognize each other. Others search desperately for lost kin. The Red Cross posts bulletin boards covered with lists of names. Survivors crowd around, tracing letters with shaking fingers. Many names end with the same word: unknown. By early May, the war's end is official. Hitler is dead. Berlin has fallen. Germany signs unconditional surrender. But in places like Salzwedel, surrender feels less like triumph and more like exhaustion. The soldiers still patrol, but the real work is care. They bury the dead, burn infected bedding, disinfect the barns again and again. Every death is recorded, every survivor tagged for transport. Amid the bureaucracy, moments of tenderness survive. An American nurse braiding a woman's hair, a soldier teaching her to pronounce freedom. Some of the liberated begin to help in the camp itself. Former nurses take over minor medical tasks. Interpreters organize supply lines. Work gives meaning. It replaces despair. One woman insists on washing all the bandages herself, saying, "I know what dirt does." The Americans let her. In the act of cleaning, she reclaims agency stolen years before. At night, the camp quiets except for coughs and the murmur of prayers in half a dozen languages. Beyond the fences, frogs croak in flooded ditches. Life, indifferent, continues. The soldiers stare into the darkness, wondering how the world allowed such things. One sergeant writes, "There is victory and there is shame. We carry both." When headquarters orders the camp dismantled, farewells are awkward. Soldiers and survivors pose for photographs neither will ever see again. Gifts are exchanged. Buttons, patches, pieces of soap wrapped in paper. A French woman kisses a GI's hand and says, through a translator, "You gave me back my skin." He cannot answer. He salutes instead. The trucks roll away, heading toward new assignments and new ruins. Behind them the field stands empty except for the shallow impressions of footprints and the faint scent of soap in the morning air. It will fade, but not completely. For weeks afterward the soldiers talk about Salzwedel more than about any battle. They describe the silence before the women believed them, the fragile laughter after washing, the way simple decency felt more powerful than any victory. For many, it becomes the image that defines the war's end, the moment cruelty met its opposite and yielded. In the official history of the 84th Infantry Division, the entry for that day remains one sentence: liberated concentration camp victims, primarily women, near Salzwedel, provided medical attention and sanitary facilities. Nothing more. The simplicity protects the emotion behind it. Between those few words lies the entire story of a world rediscovering compassion. The days after liberation blur together. The women who can stand begin helping those who cannot. The Americans bring more soap, more blankets, more crates of supplies marked U.S. Army Medical Department. The barn that once smelled of rot now carries the scent of carbolic and laundry. The sound of scrubbing never stops. To the survivors, the act of cleaning becomes prayer. For the soldiers, it is the only proof that life can return to a place built for death. Outside, spring pushes through the wreckage. Apple trees bloom along broken fences. Fields once trampled by convoys begin to green. The women walk barefoot on the grass, unsure whether they're allowed. A medic waves and smiles. "It's yours now," he says, though they cannot understand the words. They walk further, tasting the air, feeling sunlight on skin unscarred by barbed wire. For the first time in years, they smell something other than smoke. Word spreads quickly among displaced persons camps. The women from Salzwedel are free. The Red Cross uses trucks and horses to carry messages to other liberated groups. Lists of names, relatives, birthplaces, most unanswered, but hope stirs. Some survivors write letters addressed only to whoever is left. Others dictate them to nurses who know no Polish or French but write anyway, trusting translation can come later. The act of writing, like washing, is an act of recovery. By late May, Allied administrators arrive to take formal control. They wear clean uniforms and carry clipboards, not rifles. They ask questions. Where were you taken from? How long were you held? What work did you do? What did you see? The women answer as best they can, but memory falters under exhaustion. Dates dissolve. Faces blur. Still, the officers write it all down. The records will form the backbone of post-war trials, though no one here knows it yet. One of the women, a former teacher from Krakow, becomes the unofficial spokesperson. She speaks several languages and still carries herself with the precision of the classroom. "We must tell them," she says, "everything, so no one can say it didn't happen." The others nod, though their voices shake. When she is asked to describe the march before liberation, she stops halfway through and whispers, "No words are enough." The officer pauses his pen. "Tell me anyway," he says gently. She does. Nearby American soldiers listen without understanding the language, but the emotion is unmistakable. They know these testimonies will haunt them. One private tells another, "This is the first time I realized the war wasn't about killing Germans. It was about saving what's left of being human." The second nods, silent. Later, they help load more survivors onto trucks bound for larger displaced person centers near Magdeburg. Before leaving, several women insist on shaking each soldier's hand. They are skeletal, frail, yet they grip with surprising strength. At the DP camp, new routines take hold. Morning roll call, not of obedience, but of survival. Soap rations, food distribution, language lessons. The Allied administrators record names for repatriation, but many women refuse to go back. Their homes are gone, families dead, borders shifted. "I have no country," one says flatly. "Only this soap and my name." The camp chaplain writes her words in his journal. Years later, he still quotes her when asked what liberation felt like. Photographers and journalists arrive. They want to capture stories of hope. The survivors pose reluctantly. Flashbulbs pop. Their hollow faces appear in newspapers worldwide under headlines like, "Liberated Women Begin New Lives." But the pictures do not show the nights, the coughing fits, the nightmares, the terror of footsteps outside. One woman wakes screaming when a jeep backfires. The medics learn to speak softly, to never approach from behind. Healing takes more than food and rest. It requires time the world is not ready to give. In early June, a military convoy brings them to a school converted into a hospital. The blackboards are still covered with chalk lessons from 1944. German grammar, geography, the word Vaterland underlined twice. The women stare at it silently until one takes a wet cloth and erases the board. "We start again," she says. Nurses applaud softly. It is a symbolic act, but a powerful one. The old world is being scrubbed clean, not of memory, but of tyranny. Outside, children play among ruins, too young to know what the swastikas meant. Allied propaganda broadcasts announce, "The war in Europe is over." For the survivors, peace feels distant, fragile. Yet every small act, a clean shirt, a comb through hair, a song remembered, pushes against the void. A Polish woman named Helena finds a scrap of mirror and begins cutting hair for others, charging nothing. "Clean hair means you live," she says. Soon, lines form outside her corner of the courtyard. The soap, so abundant now, becomes sacred. Each woman keeps a piece wrapped in cloth, a talisman of survival. When supplies run low, they cut the bars in half and share. One writes to an American nurse months later, "The soap you gave me, I kept it for my wedding day." That bar travels with her to Paris, where she marries another survivor. She uses it once, then keeps the sliver forever. In the American camp journals, the Salzwedel liberation fades into statistics. Over 2,000 displaced women transferred. 178 died of illness. 51 repatriated. The numbers hide the faces, but the witnesses remember. A medic named John Reeves writes home, "We saw something holy in the act of washing. They cleaned their hands and cried. I will never forget that sound." His letter survives in the National Archives, unread for decades. The survivors themselves scatter across continents, some to Sweden, some to France, others to America. The memories scatter too, but one thread binds them. That day in May when soap, water, and strangers with kind eyes restored their reflection. Decades later, at reunions in Paris and Warsaw, they still talk about the soldiers who brought towels. They cannot recall names, only gestures. How one soldier looked away respectfully when handing a towel. How another insisted they deserved perfume, not just disinfectant. Dignity, rediscovered through small things. Meanwhile, across Germany, trials begin. Allied prosecutors collect affidavits from survivors. A few women from Salzwedel testify about the death marches, the starvation, the brutality. They sit in witness boxes wearing borrowed clothes, speaking through interpreters. When asked what liberation felt like, one answers simply, "It smelled like soap." The courtroom laughs nervously, not understanding the weight of those words. The post-war months blur into reconstruction. Nations draw new lines. Refugees move by the millions. Yet the small story of Salzwedel spreads quietly among medics and nurses. It becomes a lesson in humanity taught in military medical schools. Cleanliness is not just for health. It restores dignity. When new conflicts arise, that phrase reappears in training manuals. Few know its origin. In 1946, a Red Cross officer revisits the old campsite. The barns are empty, the fields plowed over. He finds a single rusted bucket half buried in soil. On its rim, faint traces of soap remain, hardened by time. He takes it back to Geneva as a keepsake. In his report, he writes, There was once a place here where human beings remembered how to be human. Years pass. The women rebuild their lives quietly. They marry, raise children, teach, sew, write. Some never speak of the camp. Others cannot stop speaking. When one of them dies decades later, her daughter finds a bar of yellowed soap wrapped in tissue in her drawer. The note beneath reads, "The first thing I owned when I was free. No medals, no trophies, just that." Back in the United States, veterans of the 84th Division form an association. They meet every year, their hair turning gray, their memories fading except for one, the day near Salzwedel. They invite speakers, display photographs, tell their children about the women they helped. During one meeting in the 1970s, a letter arrives from France, written by a former prisoner. "To the men who gave us back our skin," it begins. "You thought it was a small thing, but it was everything." They read it aloud in silence. By the late 20th century, historians begin piecing together the smaller liberations, the ones not as famous as Dachau or Belsen. Salzwedel appears in footnotes, then in oral histories, then in documentaries. The photographs resurface, women washing with soap, smiling faintly. Viewers mistake them for staged propaganda. But the negatives are dated and verified. They are real, every trembling hand and bar of soap authentic. They become symbols not of death, but of endurance. In one such documentary, an old woman, once a girl of 19 in 1945, tells her story. "They gave us water," she says softly, "and soap. I remember the smell. I remember washing my face and realizing it was still mine." She pauses, eyes wet. "That was the moment I came back." The camera lingers on her face, wrinkled yet serene. She smiles faintly. "You know," she says, "cleanliness can be freedom." In archives across the world, files labeled Salzwedel Camp remain sparse. Dates, units, reports, signatures. But the unwritten details live on in memories and diaries. A GI who once fought through Belgium writes in his final journal, "War was hell, but the day I saw them wash, I saw heaven trying to return." His children find the entry after his death and donate it to a museum. The final known survivor of that convoy, living in Copenhagen, is interviewed in the early 2000s. Asked what she remembers most vividly, she does not mention hunger or fear. She says, "The Americans gave us towels. I had forgotten what softness felt like." Then she adds, almost whispering, "That was the first time I felt the war ending." Historians later remark that the liberation of Salzwedel represents something unique. Not a grand battle or a famous surrender, but a quiet reawakening of humanity. It reminds them that victory is not only measured in territory or treaties, but in the restoration of dignity. Soap and water became instruments of resurrection. In every memoir that mentions it, those two words appear again and again. Soap and water. The simplest things, the most powerful cure. In the final weeks before their redeployment, the soldiers of the 84th gather for one last assembly near the Elbe River. Their commander reads from prepared notes, thanking them for service. Few listen. Most stare across the river where Soviet troops camp, fires glowing red at dusk. The world is dividing again, but they have seen enough to know what unity once meant. One private says quietly, "Whatever happens next, I'll remember the women." Another replies, "Me too." That was the real victory. When they march away, the wind carries the scent of spring blossoms mixed faintly with soap. The war has ended, but memory lingers like a fragrance no rain can wash away. Summer 1945. The war in Europe is over, but peace does not come quickly. The women who were liberated near Salzwedel remain under Allied care, as administrators work to reunite them with surviving relatives or find new homes. The camp hospitals are still full. Disease spreads easily in places that have been unclean for so long, and medical officers battle typhus with delousing powder and strict hygiene. Soap is once again scarce, yet every bar is treasured. The act of washing remains a ritual of defiance against the filth the war imposed. The Americans hand the site over to British and Soviet officials, who begin cataloging prisoners' names for repatriation. Tents become registration offices. Chalkboards list nations and towns. Each survivor must decide where to go. For some, home lies behind Soviet lines. For others, there is no home to return to. They move through the paperwork like shadows. Women who had been numbers on lists now trying to remember who they were before the uniforms and camps. A French nurse notes in her diary, "They have been freed, but freedom itself must be learned again." The local Germans, stunned by what they have seen, watch from a distance. Some claim ignorance of what happened in the camps. Others bring bread and vegetables to the soldiers, trying to atone. The women accept food but little else. One survivor, when asked if she forgives, answers quietly, "Forgiveness is not mine to give. Life is enough." Her words spread among the Allied personnel like a sermon. In the evenings, chaplains read from Psalms, yet even they know the sacred text cannot compete with the moral weight of what they have witnessed. By August, most of the American divisions are preparing to return home. Their supply depots shrink as Europe reorganizes under new administrations. The 84th Infantry's Medical Corps transfers its remaining patients to Red Cross units. Before departure, the soldiers visit the women one last time. They bring more towels, extra soap, chocolate bars, and small sewing kits. A sergeant jokes, "Now you can stitch a better world than we left you." The translator renders it awkwardly, but the women understand the sentiment. They laugh for the first time without fear. The soldiers drive away in columns, their trucks raising dust on the old roads. Behind them, women stand in the sunlight waving white towels in farewell. The scene is quiet, without ceremony, yet it will remain in memory longer than the parades of victory. The Red Cross nurses keep a few photographs, tired faces, open hands, faint smiles. Those images will appear in post-war archives decades later, labeled simply "Liberation, Germany, May 1945. Autumn brings colder winds and new routines. The displaced persons camps evolve into small communities. There are marriages, births, and classrooms where language lessons mix with songs from different homelands. A British relief worker records a lesson in which Polish, Dutch, and Hungarian women sing together. A patchwork choir rising above the hum of generators. The sound is fragile but determined, like civilization rebuilding itself one note at a time. In the nearby town, German civilians rebuild their houses under Allied supervision. They see the former prisoners walking freely and are reminded that the war did not end with surrender papers. A local woman who had worked as a clerk for the regime now helps in the hospital laundry. She never speaks of her past, but she folds each towel with reverence. When asked why, she answers, "Because I saw what happens when people are denied even this." Her words echo the lesson of Salzwedel more clearly than any trial. The first post-war Christmas arrives with snow covering the fields where convoys once passed. Relief workers decorate a pine branch in the hospital ward. The women exchange small gifts made from scraps, embroidered handkerchiefs, folded paper stars, bits of ribbon. One of the American nurses who stayed on receives a bar of handmade soap wrapped in cloth. "For you," they tell her, "because you taught us to be clean again." She keeps it for the rest of her life. The records from Salzwedel enter the official Allied reports under the heading "Liberation of Concentration Camp," April-May 1945. Beneath the numbers, dead, rescued, transferred, there are handwritten notes about morale, hygiene, and mental state. One line stands out: "Restoration through cleanliness remarkable. Psychological recovery linked to return of dignity." It is an understated sentence, but historians will later call it the first documentation of trauma therapy through human care. In the following years, survivors resettle across Europe. Some join relatives abroad, others remain in Germany working with relief organizations. Several become nurses themselves, citing the influence of the Americans who had cared for them. In Paris, a foundation is established by former prisoners to help displaced women. Its emblem is a towel folded over a basin. Few people understand the symbol, but those who lived through Salzwedel know immediately what it means. As Europe rebuilds, the camps are dismantled. Timber from the barracks is reused for houses. Barbed wire is melted down for tools. Yet the ground still holds traces: buttons, pins, shards of enamel bowls. Archaeologists decades later will find them and mark the sites quietly, without fanfare. They understand that the story of liberation is not about monuments, but about the moment a human face looked in water and recognized itself again. Decades pass. Europe heals in uneven ways, its scars visible only to those who look closely. The story of the women freed near Salzwedel is almost forgotten, tucked inside archives and footnotes, mentioned only in letters home or dusty reports. Yet fragments surface everywhere. An old photograph in a museum, a line in a medic's diary, a piece of soap kept in a drawer. In the 1950s, one of the former prisoners, now a teacher in Warsaw, speaks to her students about freedom. She never tells them where she was held, only that she once learned the meaning of kindness from soldiers who brought towels. When people treat you as human, she says, you begin to believe you are human again. The students think it is poetry. She lets them believe that. In another part of the world, an American veteran named John Reeves gives a talk at a small-town school. He reads from the letter he wrote in 1945 about the women washing their faces in clean water. The children listen, puzzled by the simplicity of the act he describes. When he finishes, he says quietly, "That was the first time I understood what victory really meant." There is no applause, only silence, the kind that honors rather than celebrates. By the 1960s, historians begin compiling survivor testimonies. A handful of the Salzwedel women are interviewed. Their voices tremble but remain clear. They speak of the march, the hunger, the fear, and of that first moment of gentleness. One tells the interviewer, "I remember a soldier handing me soap. My hands shook so badly I dropped it. He picked it up and placed it back in my palm, as if it were something precious. Maybe that was the first time someone treated me as if I mattered." The tape recorder hums softly. The interviewer, unable to speak, simply nods. The 84th Infantry Division Association funds a memorial plaque decades later. It stands near the site of the old camp, set in stone amid wildflowers. The inscription is short. Here, in May 1945, American soldiers freed women who had forgotten the meaning of touch and water. Their freedom began with a bar of soap. Visitors rarely come, but when they do, they linger. The air feels still, respectful. The nearby town has changed, new houses, new generations, but the ground holds memory like a low heartbeat. During the 1990s, filmmakers searching through archives rediscover the photographs taken by Red Cross staff in the days after liberation. The images show women standing by buckets, washing, smiling faintly. The producers decide to use them in a documentary about small acts of humanity in war. When the film airs, viewers write letters saying those few seconds, hands rinsing in water, soldiers passing towels, moved them more than battle scenes. One critic calls it the most peaceful image to emerge from the most violent century. In the early 2000s, one of the last survivors, now in her 80s, returns to the site with her granddaughter. The field is quiet, covered in wild grass. She points to where the huts once stood, where the Americans parked their trucks, where she first touched soap again. "It was so small," she says softly. "You wouldn't think something that small could save you." Her granddaughter listens, holding her arm, unsure how to respond. The old woman continues, "We had no names then, only numbers. But when they gave us towels, I felt like a person again. That's what I remember most." She takes a piece of the local soil and presses it between her fingers. "This is where I began to live." The camera of a visiting journalist catches the gesture. Years later, that brief clip will appear in another documentary titled "The Day Humanity Returned." Across the Atlantic, the families of the American soldiers who served in the 84th find their fathers' and grandfathers' wartime journals. Many contain the same memory written in different words. "They cried when we gave them soap." Some of these entries end abruptly, as if the men could not find language to finish what they felt. The families donate the journals to museums. Scholars note how the entries reveal a quiet transformation. Soldiers who entered Germany as fighters, leaving as witnesses. In museums and exhibitions, visitors pause before displays containing personal items from the liberated camps. Among the striped uniforms and photographs, there is often a small, ordinary bar of wartime soap. Its label faded, edges cracked. The description reads, "Given by American troops to female prisoners after liberation, May 1945. Many visitors move on quickly, but some stop, realizing what it represents. A return to dignity through something humble, a rebirth measured not in speeches or parades, but in water and lather. Time softens everything except truth. The archives remain, the letters yellow, but the meaning endures." Historians now see the liberation of Salzwedel as a symbol of how victory in war is not just the end of conflict, but the restoration of human compassion. The scene of soap and towels stands as quiet testimony. Humanity can survive even the deepest degradation if someone, somewhere, remembers kindness. When the last survivors pass, their children and grandchildren continue to tell the story. Schools in Europe include it in lessons on liberation. Teachers explain that small acts, sharing food, giving comfort, can become moral revolutions. A student once asks why soap mattered so much. The teacher answers, "Because it washed away more than dirt. It washed away fear." Today, the field where the camp once stood is empty. Grass waves gently where the barracks rotted away. A single stone marker remains, weathered by rain. Tourists sometimes stumble upon it, reading the few lines carved there. They may not know the full story, but the silence of the place tells enough. The wind carries the faint scent of pine and earth. Birds sing. Life has reclaimed the ground completely. If one listens carefully, one can almost hear the water again, the sound of buckets being filled, the low murmur of women rediscovering themselves, the laughter of soldiers relieved that something good could still be done after so much destruction. It is not the noise of war, but the whisper of its end. History often remembers great victories by dates and generals. Yet sometimes the truest triumphs happen quietly, in gestures so small they seem invisible to the world. A bar of soap, a towel, a basin of clean water. These became emblems of civilization's survival. The soldiers never imagined their kindness would be remembered, and the women never thought the world would care. But history did, and so the story endures, in diaries, in museums, in hearts. The day the women were given soap was the day they were given back the right to feel human. May 1945, when the war ended, and humanity began again.